Howdy, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Texas Victory Garden. My name is Jared. This is going to be a third part in a 5-part series I'm doing on how to start a garden. And in this episode, we'll be looking at what materials we can use to build out our raised beds. So let's go ahead and get started. So when choosing our raised bed materials, there's a number of different types of material we can use. We can use wood, concrete blocks, plastics, different types of plastics, galvanized steel, hay bales, or stone. And there's a lot of other materials besides these that you can use, but the number one thing we want to make sure is that whatever material you use, that material doesn't leach different substances from the material into the soil, because we're going to be eating the plants that are in the soil. If the materials leach substances in there, it could possibly poison the plant or poison us. So make sure that you do research on whatever material you use to make sure that it is not going to be toxic to you or the plants. An example of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about substances that leach from our material into the soil is something like a railroad ties. So a lot of older gardeners, they would use railroad ties to make the perimeter around their raised beds. And it is wood. The railroad ties are wood. The problem is they're covered in a substance called creosote. And creosote is the oily byproduct of the distillation of coal tar. And it is a carcinogen, and it can cause cancer. And so my point is, why would we want to put this possible carcinogen around our raised bed and having it leach into the soil, the creosote leaching into the soil, and we're in there handling the soil with our hands, and we've got our food product growing, our vegetables growing inside that soil. So I would say we don't want to use something like a railroad tie, because there's a possibility that we would be exposing ourselves to a carcinogen. And so we want to use something more natural. So out of all these materials, I think that wood and concrete blocks are probably the most readily available to most people, and probably the most popular materials to use for a raised bed garden. Plus, I've used them myself. So we'll be looking at both wood and concrete blocks, looking at the pros and cons of each, and which one might be good to use in your garden. So first, let's go ahead and look at wood. So as far as wood goes, there's a number of different species you can choose, but the two main ones are going to be pine and cedar. And there's other species you can find, but they're a lot harder to find, and usually they're going to be more expensive. But it just depends from region to region whether what's available to you and what the prices are going to be, depending upon the region. But the main two types of species of wood are going to be pine and cedar. So pine is going to be cheaper. I priced it, and it is November of 2020, and in Southeast Texas is going to cost $6.83 for a 2x6x8. Meanwhile, cedar is going to be significantly more expensive, almost 3 times as expensive for that same 2x6x8, and cedar is going to cost you $17.78. So when you look at cost, we can see that cedar is going to be the loser. Definitely pine is a lot cheaper. However, we have to factor other things in. So how long they last. So pine is not going to last nearly as long as cedar. Pine is only going to last 3 to 5 years, while cedar is going to last possibly 10 to 20 years. So you can tell that initial investment, almost 3 times, is going to, there's a reason why. It's going to last a lot longer than the pine. So you get what you pay for, pretty much. The other thing is that pine, you can find all kinds of dimensions. So as far as the cuts, like I said, this is a 2x6x8 I was pricing out, but you can find easily a 2x8x8 or a 2x10x8. Cedar is going to be a lot harder to find different dimensions at your local store. Now, I mean, depends on where you live, but for the most part, cedar is going to be a lot harder to find in the dimensions you want than pine is. Now, which one should you choose if you decide to go ahead and use the wood for your raised bed? Either the pine or the cedar. Well, what I recommend is that if you are planning on living in the property less than 3 to 5 years, there's no point in buying the cedar. The pine's a lot cheaper, and there's no reason that you're going to need anything that's going to last 10 to 20 years if you're only going to be on the property less than 5 years. However, if you're going to live on your property more than 5 years, you probably would want to go ahead and invest in the cedar. It's a higher cost initially, but it's going to last you a lot longer than the pine. So that's my recommendation. If you're going to live on the property for a short time, less than 3 to 5 years, go with the pine. and if you're going to live on the property more than 5 years, go with the cedar. So when I was talking about pine earlier, I wasn't referring to pressure treated wood. So pressure treated wood is going to be pine that is chemically treated to slow down the rot process. And you can tell that it's going to be pressure treated wood because when you go to pick up your wood in the store, the end of the board, they'll have a label stapled to the end of it that says that it's pressure treated wood. And also, it's going to usually have a green tint. Unlike the regular pine, which is more of a yellow, the pressure treated is going to have this green tint to it. And prior to 2003, they used a chemical called chromated copper arsenate, and that has arsenic in it. And so arsenic is a naturally occurring compound. However, whenever they would put it in these boards, it would be at high concentrations. And the worry was that it was leaching into the soil, could be leaching into the soil, and causing toxicity levels of the arsenic. So after 2003, they decided to take the arsenic out of the materials they're using. So after 2003, you shouldn't have arsenic in the boards. They use more different coppers. They increase the copper levels in them and other chemicals. So the general consensus is that prior to 2003, you don't want to use, if it was made prior to 2003, you don't want to use that for your bed. And after 2003, you should be able to use it. However, the USDA still prohibits treated lumber for soil contact use in their Certified National Organic Program, published in 2011, and I'll put a link to that in the description below to that report. Personally, I don't use treated lumber because the USDA doesn't allow it for organic, so it kind of puts that question mark. Is it really safe? It doesn't have the arsenic in it now, but if the USDA is not allowing it, it just kind of makes me cautious. And so I just try to use natural lumber. Now, if you already have treated lumber post 2003 that doesn't have arsenic that you're already using in your garden, more likely it's going to be okay. But me personally, I'd rather not use treated lumber because of this. Now that we've looked at wood, let's go ahead and look at our next material to use for our raised beds. We can use concrete blocks, and there's all kinds of different dimensions you can use, but there's two main ones that gardeners use. It's going to be a 4 by 8 by 16 inches and a 8 by 8 by 16 inches. So the 4 by 8 by 16, that's going to be 4 inches wide. There's one right here, 4 inches wide, 8 inches high, and 16 inches long. So you would take these and put them, the 16 inches the long. So you're going to take these and put them this way along your garden bed. And these are great for most gardens because really we just need 6 inches of soil for most vegetables, except for those root crops like potatoes, sweet potatoes, and really long carrots and stuff like that. But for most vegetables, even like small roots like beets, radishes, turnips, all we need is 6 inches of soil. So these are great because they've got 8 inches on the height, so you've still got 2 inches to spare on top of here. And I priced those locally in Southeast Texas in 2020 November, and they were $1 per block. The next one is going to be 8 by 8 by 16, kind of a traditional cinder block. And that one is interesting because so the length is 16, and then the height is 8, and the width is 8. And so you would put these like this along the garden. And the interesting thing about these is that you can actually, there's voids, like 2 voided holes in them, and you can actually use those to grow vegetables kind of on the perimeter, so you can grow within the perimeter of your garden. And also you can use these to grow root crops like potatoes, and like we were talking about earlier, because you can get more than 6 inches. You can stack them on top of each other. They're pretty stable if you stack them on top of each other. And I priced these locally. They were $1.65. Advantage to blocks is that they last a long time. So they're going to last a lot longer than wood. The problem is, or the exception is, if you're in a wet and freezing climate. I saw this on My Gardener's channel the other day, but I don't have the problem down here because we don't have a lot of freezing. We have a lot of wet weather, but not freezing weather. But apparently the problem is when these concrete blocks, they get wet, and then you have numerous hard freezes where it freezes and thaws, they can crack really easy. So if you live in a wet, freezing type climate, you probably don't want to go with the concrete blocks. But if you live in any other climate, they're going to last a long time. The disadvantage to the blocks is going to be that whenever we do set them up between the blocks, there's going to be a little crack in between them. So unlike the board you have a solid surface all the way down the length of it. The blocks, you're going to have cracks in between each block. So that can allow soil and weeds and stuff to grow in there, and so that can cause a problem. The other thing is that, as you can tell, they're very heavy compared to wood. So now that we've looked at both wood and concrete blocks individually, let's look at them on a side-by-side comparison. So if we look at the weight of the wood versus the concrete blocks, the wood is going to be a lot lighter, and concrete blocks are going to be heavier. So if you have a bad back or anything like that, you probably don't want to go with the concrete blocks. You probably want to go ahead and go with the wood. The next thing is going to be longevity. How long are they going to last? Wood is going to last anywhere from 3 to 20 years, depending upon the species you choose. And then concrete blocks, they should last indefinitely, unless you're in a specific climate, and the climate that is a wet, freezing type climate. So in that type of climate, the blocks, apparently they get wet, and then it freezes, and they can crack. So if you don't live in a wet, freezing climate, concrete blocks is going to be a better choice as far as longevity. They're going to be indefinitely. So they get the check mark there. The next thing is going to be what kind of tools are needed and what kind of skill set is needed. So for wood, you're going to need different tools. You're going to need a saw to cut your wood, a drill to put the pilot holes in and screw it together. And then concrete blocks, you really don't require any tools. You're just going to set them up lengthwise, and you really don't need to do any there's not really much skill set needed for that. So in that case, the concrete blocks are going to get the check mark. The next thing is going to be price. Now wood, there's a large price range in wood. So the pine one in my area is the 81 cents per foot. And then cedar was $2.23 per foot. So you can see there's a large price range there. Now the concrete blocks, there's a price range as well, but it's going to be a lower price range. We got the solid concrete block was 4 by 8 by 16, and that was only 75 cents per foot. Then the cinder block was 8 by 8 by 16. It was $1.24 per foot. So if we look at all these materials together, the cheapest material we can find is going to be the solid concrete blocks at 75 cents per foot. So in that case, then we get the check mark. So if we look at them, everything together in comparison, we would see that the wood only has 1 check mark, and then the concrete blocks have 3 check marks. Now, this doesn't mean that the concrete blocks are always going to be the right option for you. It depends on your specific needs and your skill set. And so just look at this and kind of get a good overview of what maybe would be good for your area and for you specifically in your garden. I've been gardening for about 10 years now, and so I've used both wood and concrete blocks successfully. This year though, we just moved, and I am starting my new garden, and I decided to use both. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a cedar 2 by 6 by 8, and I'm putting that on top of a concrete block 2 by 8 by 16. So it's a thin concrete block, and the concrete block is going to be the walkway on the outside, but I'm going to have it just underneath the cedar board. And so between the two of them, the actual height of the cedar is 5.5 inches. The actual height of the concrete block is 1.625 inches. So it's a little over 7 inches on the height of the total perimeter of the garden. And so we only needed 6 inches of soil, so that's perfect. I've still got like a little over an inch of room to play with on top there. So this is the side view of it. As you can see, the cedar is here and the concrete block is underneath. And like an aerial view of that would be the soil in the middle, and I have the cedar on the perimeter of the soil, and then the concrete block on the sides is a walkway, but then I have the very edge of that concrete block put underneath the cedar to raise the cedar bed up a little bit. So giving me a total of 7 inches. In the 5th part of this 5-part series I'm doing, I'm actually going to go out to the garden and show you how to pull it all together, and I'm actually going to show you how to do this, and so it'll make more sense then. But everything that I've looked at in this this series is based on the All New Square Foot Gardening book by Bartholomew. If you want to check that out, I'll put a link in the description below. And if you found value out of this video and it's helping you start a new garden, please give it a like and subscribe. And until next time, God bless and have a good day.